in the interest of time. Welcome, everybody. My name is Eric Mary Bojic. I am the director for the Center for Real Estate Entrepreneurship at the School of Business at George Mason University. And welcome to our webinar this evening called Rise of a Region, a Development History of Northern Virginia. So tonight we will answer some questions. How did the built environment of Northern Virginia develop into the places we live, work, and entertain in today? What lessons from the past can we learn as we work to develop the region's future? If you're a real estate professional who just moved to this area, just started your career, or just want to learn more about the economic and development history of Northern Virginia, tonight we will deepen your understanding of this dynamic market. Just as a reminder, this event is being recorded and a link will be sent to all those who registered. Please use the Q&A feature in your Zoom dashboard if you have any questions, and we will have a moderated question for the last few minutes of this evening's presentation. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce the Center for Real Estate Entrepreneurship. For those of you that don't know us, we are George Mason's, we strive to be George Mason's platform for real estate education and a forum for important real estate issues regarding the built environment. We are supported and advised by some of the leading companies in the real estate industry in the Washington, D.C. metro area. If you're interested in supporting real estate education at George Mason University, please shoot me an email at my email there below. And I'd like to introduce our speaker for this evening. Our speaker is Andrew Painter, who's a shareholder with Walsh, Colucci, Lugley, and Walsh, a law firm based in Arlington, Virginia, which is known for their land use expertise in Northern Virginia. Andrew works for the firm's Land Use and Zoning Practice Group, where he focuses on securing zoning entitlements across Northern Virginia. He is a native of Northern Virginia and has spent much time traveling and writing about the region's land development history, and received an award for the Virginia chapter of the American Planning Association for his review on enduring rural landscapes in Fairfax County. He is also the author of a book published by George Mason University Press on the history of the Virginia wine industry. So without further ado, I'll turn over the screen share to Andrew.
Thanks a lot. Let me just see, here we go. And thanks everybody for joining in this evening. This is actually a 3-hour lecture, which I'm going to pare down and kind of just talk at you for like an hour and just go lightning fast through some of this stuff. There is an outline that's posted, I believe, in the chat. And again, it's a 3-hour lecture. Happy to give it any time because I like to talk. And so I'm going to just sort of move very quickly through a lot of these things because there's a lot to get through. So just bear with me. There's obviously a lot going back to the history of Northern Virginia to the colonial era and everything like that. But we're going to start our discussion this evening in the early 1900s of the 20th century. It was a time of great growth in the country, and the same was true here in Northern Virginia, which boasted numerous small towns and crossroads that dotted the countryside that had increasing rail connections, trolley connections in the District of Columbia, and the suburban growth, the first rate of suburban growth after about 1900 or so was most pronounced in Alexandria County. This was the county that, or the part of the area that was retroceded back from the District of Columbia in 1846 to the Commonwealth of Virginia. And when it came back in, it came in with the city of Alexandria, a chartered city, and the unincorporated area called Alexandria County. Alexandria was the most populous and the main economic engine of Virginia, or of Northern Virginia at that time. And Alexandria County was largely sort of a small area of farms with some of the areas that you know today, small little villages like Ballston and Clarendon and Meyer Heights and Roslin Farms that sort of grew up along the county's roads. Clarendon itself became the commercial downtown district of the county, of Alexandria County. And by the way, the General Assembly, in a surprise move in 1920, decided to change the name from Alexandria County to Arlington County. Even the County Board of Supervisors, of which there were 3 at the time, different magisterial districts, 3 different districts, they had no clue that the General Assembly was changing the name to Arlington County. But needless to say, Clarendon was sort of thriving, and here's picture of Clarendon. You can see Washington Boulevard on the left, sort of curving up to sort of the main point in Clarendon, where if you see the building that's sort of in the center of it, that's where Northside Social is today. So you're looking due east. And here's, of course, what Clarendon looked like back then. If you look where my cursor is, down where the two buses are, this is where Liberty Tavern is. And then where the Clarendon Trust Building is in this entire block is now a park. And at the end of the park, of course, is the Metrorail station. You had a series of trolleys that were all across Northern Virginia. In Fort Myer, you had a trolley that ran down all the way to Mount Vernon as well, where there was a nice tea room at the terminus of the station. And then you have these two major roads that are constructed. One is called Lee Highway. It's sort of the southern answer to the nation's first transcontinental highway, which is the Lincoln Highway. And then you had Jefferson Davis Highway, which ran from the 14th Street Bridge all the way south, and it was supposed to go all the way to sort of San Diego, travel through Mississippi and everything all the way west. But that was a transcontinental highway as well, authorized by the General Assembly back in 1922. And if you followed recent events, you know that Arlington has renamed Lee Highway Langston Boulevard. And then also the city of Alexandria and Arlington caught up with Fairfax County and renamed its portion of, or their portions of Route 1 from Jefferson Davis Highway to Richmond Highway. The Great Falls and Old Dominion Railroad was constructed in 1906. It's an electrified railroad that runs between Georgetown and Great Falls Park. The owners of the lines lended their names to two of the stations, including the McLean Station, which sprouted up a very small community, 1910, known as McLean, and the rail bed would eventually be converted into Old Dominion Drive. In the early 1900s, especially during World War II, you had this big demand for dairy products that attracted Northern Virginia farmers to dairy products or dairy farming. So between 1920 and 1950, Fairfax County leads all other Virginia jurisdictions in terms of dairy products. The average milk production in the county's cows was more than twice the national average. Shown in the upper left-hand corner is Sadie the Holstein, pictured here after returning from her triumphant visit from the State Fair in 1924. She was able to produce a record 30 tons of milk and 1 ton of butter in a 3-year period. And you can see on the bottom left-hand corner, sort of a truck float that publicizes or publicizes Fairfax County's leadership in dairy herds as well. And then you can also see at Herndon Junction or at the Herndon Station along the W&OD Railroad milk jugs. Herndon and Purcellville turned out to be these epicenters of the dairy industry as well. And you can see the sort of Currier and Ives image of downtown Herndon in the early 1900s. And I guess, you know, what you see, of course, are milk jugs in the foreground there. Small towns grow up during this period. The town of Providence, which would eventually become the town of Fairfax and ultimately the city of Fairfax, is shown here. And roads, very bad roads across Northern Virginia during this time. Northern Virginia was absolutely infamous for it. You just spit on the road and traffic slows down to 2 miles an hour. The roads were often impassable after heavy rains. Even the best weathered horse-drawn wagons and motor vehicles had a very difficult time navigating Northern Virginia's rutted byways with its vicious and sort of dense clay. Here's an image of Route 123 looking from Tyson's corner store heading towards Vienna in the 1930s. So this is the condition basically of Northern Virginia at the time, very bucolic and beautiful. The history of our region, though, from 1930 to the present really can be summarized in one word, and that word is growth. During this time period, since World War II, the region has absolutely exploded as people first and later businesses began calling it home. And what brought Northern Virginia into the modern era really was the dramatic growth of the federal government that came about with the election of Franklin Roosevelt in 1933. With his election comes great increases in federal government programs to respond to the Great Depression. And concurrently with those increases in bureaucracy come employees to administer the new programs. A lot of those employees moved into Northern Virginia from all parts of the country to work for the federal government directly across the river. And since the automobile provided increased mobility, and since Northern Virginia offered less hectic lifestyles than the inner city of the District of Columbia, it became inevitable that those new federal workers would be anxious to call Northern Virginia home. And so, you know, this is really where you start seeing Northern Virginia being a place apart from the rest of Virginia. Politically, socially, we are not being run as much by the Dixiecrats anymore. We really are forever sort of separated sort of mentally and socially from the rest of Virginia. The pace of growth picked up in the 1930s and the 1940s, especially as the federal government expanded into World War II. You get National Airport opening up in 1941. You get Fort Belvoir, which was founded as Camp Humphreys during World War I. Today, it serves as the headquarters for about 51,000 workers and 7,100 residents on post. And the biggest one, of course, was the Pentagon. It was located in Northern Virginia, so it would have easy access to National Airport. You have defense contracting, which leads into the development of advanced technologies clustered around the Pentagon. And then over time, the firms began migrating out to what is today Tyson's Corner, and then further out to the Dulles Toll Road over time. Along with the coming of the Pentagon are a series of new roads, sort of the Pentagon road network around Fort Myer, Shirley Highway, Route 110, if you can find a way to get onto it. It's always confusing, but this entire road system comes there as well. Arlington decides to rename its streets. More on that at another time, but the street names, depending on where you are in the county, north of Route 50, south of Route 50, and then they are done in alphabetical order, first in one-syllable letters, one-syllable names, then 2, and then 3 as you head out to Falls Church in the Fairfax County line. And the idea is that you can figure out where you are anywhere in Arlington County based on whether it's north or south and what street number it is. So just something to keep in the back of your mind. That's pretty interesting. The GW Parkway is another major road that is built in different stages between 1929 and 1972. It's the first modern motorway to be built by the federal government. Trees, this is the first time that you have trees being planted purposely to enhance the beauty of the road with various pull-offs and things like that. The northern sections were completed in the 1950s and 1960s and are considered masterful examples of parkway design with their sort of broader width and continuous median and sweeping curves and dramatic views. So something that's pretty neat. The Route 50 corridor, which runs from DC all the way out to Fairfax and then beyond. In 1930, it was determined by Arlington County that another sort of central modern road that ran in an east-west direction was needed. So Route 50 is constructed between Fort Myer and Falls Church on what's today Hillwood Avenue, that then loops back into Lee Highway. It was originally called Lee Boulevard, and it's completed to Falls Church by 1935, and then would eventually be completed to Fairfax Circle by 1950. In the upper left-hand corner is what you can see when it first opened in the 1930s. And then, of course, 20 years later, it is a commuter hub as it is and remains today. Shirley Highway gets constructed in 1941. It's a wartime measure to relieve traffic congestion for the thousands of government workers who are commuting between DC, Arlington, and Fairfax. It is constructed as an alternative to Jefferson Davis Highway between the 14th Street Bridge and Woodbridge. So it took it all the way over across the Occoquan, and that's where the limited access highway began. Here you can see them laying it out with the concrete. It's a concrete road, and you can see the Shirlington Circle Glebe Road interchange in the lower image. There are a series of new multifamily housing projects being built to house the new residents, and you have businesses that open to serve them. You have Park Fairfax on the north side of Shirley Highway, which is shown in the upper portion of the image here, that opens up in 1942, about 1,600 townhome units. And then you have Fairlington, which is shown in the lower portion of the screen in a sort of a triangle, 3,400 garden apartments. It's the largest project to be financed by what's known as the Defense Homes Corporation. And this is what those look like. They were renovated back in 1972 and pretty much all converted to condominiums. And then Shirlington, it opens up in 1944. It is the first large shopping center to open in the DC suburbs. It steadily expands until the mid-1980s, gets rehabilitated in the 1980s as the Village at Shirlington, and of course has seen phenomenal success since then. The population growth that occurs between the big counties is shown in this bar graph. Between 1900 and 1940, shown in blue, Arlington leads the way because it is the first jurisdiction emanating out in a western and southern direction from the District of Columbia. You can see Fairfax kind of starting to tick up in terms of population between 1900 and 1940. The population of Loudoun actually decreases during this time. And then Prince William is sort of increasing as well. But really the name of the game from the turn of the century to World War II is Arlington County. As the veterans come home and wartime energies shift to peacetime tasks, you get federal employees and military service members that are looking for affordable housing. First, they start in Arlington and Alexandria, and then they start migrating further out into Fairfax County at greater and greater distances. Those who were along for the ride and could go along for the ride left. It's just how it was. So there was this pressure to build new roads, new housing, new services. Everyone, again, that can go is heading out of the town. And this trend really does mirror a national trend in this mad dash to the suburbs. If you've ever seen Edward Scissorhands, where everyone just sort of leaves at the same time and the moving day occurs at the same time, this was repeated throughout the country. Many of us have an image in our head of this first time that our parents or our grandparents may have built a home. If you were lucky enough to be sort of a suburban kid, and a lot of us have pictures just like this of that experience. I certainly do, and now that's been repeated with my children when we renovated our house, and it's pretty special. Oh, there they are, actually. So we renovate our house. So there they are. During this time, Northern Virginia, especially Fairfax County, becomes the site of a major boom in the construction of small and low-cost single-family homes. There's a VA loan guarantee program. There's a series of GI, benefits for our servicemen, men and women that are coming home. But this really is the beginning of the spectacular growth that Northern Virginia has undergone over the last 50 years. By the early 1950s, suburban development was changing the outskirts of Falls Church, shown here. And here's the State Theater. And right here where my cursor is the downtown area of Route 7 and Route 29. But, Falls Church, Fairfax, Annandale, North Springfield. Springfield itself, here's Annandale in 1965, brand new growth occurring. And McLean, a lot of sort of what we call tract housing today, Cape Cods, modified colonials, that sort of thing. And again, low cost housing. Springfield, and these are images of Springfield shown here, is one of the best known and most successful responses to Northern Virginia's population growth since World War II. It remained a rural crossroads until 1946, when a realtor and a developer named Edwin Carr subdivides the area, believing that Springfield was going to be the last easily accessible tract within 12 miles of the District of Columbia. And over time, you have the unique combination of transportation facilities, industrial development on the north side, and the GSA warehouse on the south side that really combines to make this a complete community. You have Pimment Hills, shown in the upper left-hand corner in the 1950s, 1,650 homes laid out. You have Bellevue in the 1950s, 980 apartments south of Alexandria. Lake Barcroft, created in 1915 to dam up the Holmes Run and serve the Alexandria Water Company. It is sold in 1950 to a group of New England developers along with 680 acres. And they have this idea of creating a lakefront community of miniature country estates. And today there's more than 1,000 homes, 250 of which sit right on the lake. So it's a fishable, swimmable, shady area inside the Beltway that's been a very successful community. Other communities, Holmes Run Acres in 1951, 350 homes nestled west of Falls Church. Holland Hills in 1949, developed between then and 1971. This is one exception, if you ever get a chance to go down there off of Fort Hunt Road, one exception to the monotonous pattern of subdivisions during this time. These are DC's first major moderately priced mid-century modernist homes. It has flat roofs, linear design, open layouts, and that sort of thing. There's a series of outer suburbs as well. In Woodbridge, east of I-95, there's Marumsco Village. There's Lake Jackson that opens it's developed between the 1930s and 1950s on about 800 acres, kind of a quirky community that proudly lives up to that name today. North of downtown Manassas on the old Breeden Farm, 1,000 homes are built there in 1957. The city of Manassas Park incorporates in 1975. It is now Virginia's newest city, et cetera. As I mentioned, those that could go on the drive out to the suburbs could. Racially deed restrictive covenants, though, were used to prevent people of color from purchasing or leasing or occupying homes in white communities. This lasted until 1968, when Congress passed the Housing Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act that outlawed discrimination on the basis of race or ethnicity in the sale or rental of housing. And even though it's no longer a legally sanctioned practice, the residential patterns that were created by these racial deed restrictive covenants still persist. This is actually a racial deed restrictive covenant from my own home. And I'm sure that you all have probably seen and read about these as well. As you get more and more people moving into Northern Virginia, the need for goods and services also grows as residential housing patterns sort of cause this suburban sprawl. So you get these new commercial facilities that are catering to shoppers that are driving automobiles. And I think few could have seen at the time just how important of an impact this would have on the downtown area. So soon you have all the major department stores downtown moving out to Northern Virginia, whether it's Woodward and Lothrop, Garfinkel's, or Hecht's. Shown here, the largest suburban retail space on the East Coast when it opened in 1951 is the Parkington Shopping Mall. It offered centralized indoor climate-controlled space, which is something we now take for granted. It is anchored by a Hecht's. It is developed around a parking garage. So you take parking garage in Arlington. This is at the corner of Glebe and Wilson, in the heart of what is today Ballston, where the Ballston Macy's is. A parking garage in Arlington, you combine it together, you get the Parkington Shopping Center. And this is what it looked like. And again, where the Hecht Company building is today, that is where the Macy's is. And then of course, Ballston has been redeveloped as versus Ballston Common Mall and later as Ballston Quarter after 2015. Seven Corners. It opens up in 1956. It is Northern Virginia's first regional shopping mall designed to serve a market area of up to 50,000 people. It includes a series of modernized highway upgrades, which today are just clogged with traffic, but it really becomes the prototype for other shopping centers in Northern Virginia. You've got two anchors, a Woody's and a Garfinkel's, with a corridor that runs in between. Just because there's all this growth happening doesn't mean that there's still not rural areas in Northern Virginia. You get this is the Sunset Hills Farm, which is today Reston, but you have, large scale machinery. This is what keeps farms going for a number of years, the mechanization of agriculture out there. And there's a series of other agricultural and small sort of whistle stop communities or just small communities, whether it's Colin Run or Tyson's Corner or Chantilly, that are still out there on the periphery just waiting to be developed. Then we move into the 1960s. And in 1960s, the growth here has almost largely, not exclusively, but largely been concentrated in Fairfax County. You have the suburban areas of Arlington County and the city of Alexandria that are almost fully developed by this point in time. And so you have all the new growth occurring in Fairfax and the neighboring counties in Maryland and Prince George's County and Montgomery County. They're the most rapidly growing areas of this region. Between 1950 and 1960, Fairfax County's population triples, between 98,000 people to 250,000 people in that one 10-year decade alone. So we think growth is rampant now. Triple-digit growth during this period of time is unbelievable. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, you have that federal government expansion that's increasing at a much more rapid rate. The concept of decentralization, where we're going to move out of the district because we're afraid the evil commies might end up bombing DC. So you have this decentralization. You have these Nike missiles in Great Falls and in Lorton that are constructed. The CIA opens up its headquarters outside of McLean in Langley in 1961. You also get the U.S. Geological Survey that opens up its headquarters in what is today Reston in 1973. And if the Pentagon was the big kahuna, the piece de resistance of federal spending during the Great Depression and World War II, then the piece de resistance during this period has to be Dullest Airport, which opens up in 1962. It is built on 17,500 acres at the time. And I like this image because it shows you just how big of a piece of property this really is. The site was chosen after 7 years of opposition to a similar airport idea in Burke. It has a terminal that is designed for the jet age, developed by Eero Saarinen. Even though it was originally considered a white elephant, the airport's importance was, of course, realized in the 1970s, 1980s, and today, especially after Dulles was made United Airlines' headquarters, or one of its 4 domestic hubs in 1988. Today, it accounts for 25,000 jobs. Just like the Pentagon came along with some bells and whistles, so too did the airport. First, you get what's known as the Dulles Access Road, shown in purple here. It's a new 13.5-mile access road between the Beltway and the airport. And eventually, this will attract new communities. And then you get the extension of what is today known as Route 28, running up along the eastern portion of it between Centerville and up Route 7. As the population boom increases, Fairfax County needs a new sort of government center. The Massey building, which is shown here, opens up as the county office building in 1969. It's recently been torn down. One thing I also want to say too about Dulles is the Dulles Interceptor. Jurisdictions would kill to have this level of investment, but the Dulles Interceptor is a sewer trunk line that runs from the airport all the way up to the Potomac, all the way down the Potomac to Blue Plains. And it takes about 6 days once you flush your toilet for that waste to get all the way down to Blue Plains where it's treated in the District of Columbia. But it's still sending about 17.8 million gallons a day to the Blue Plains facility. But that allows a lot of the growth around Reston, Herndon, and Sterling later to take off. Some of the growth, this is the Leesburg, this is downtown Leesburg that you can see, and you can see the start of the Route 15 bypass, which occurs during this period in time. A new center of growth also occurs. The new town of Reston, which is a planned community commenced by Robert Edward Simon in 1962. It's a community that's later taken over by Gulf Reston in 1967 and then by Reston Land in 1978. This is really seen as sort of a hippie commune initially. No one had really developed a community like this. The mixing of land uses, this is the first place where we're mixing apartments and townhomes and duplexes and single family all together, along with office and industrial uses. And it was also at a time, as we saw, where much of the new development in Virginia was under deed restrictions, saying you couldn't sell to this person or that person. Bob Simon just eschewed all of that and developed his own community. He created an area along this new Dulles Access Road between Sunrise Valley Drive and Sunset Hills Road as the Reston Center for Industry and Government. And it was extremely well positioned to become the center of a high-tech research and development, business services, and administrative headquarters area. He designed a series of community centers and small neighborhood-serving retail centers. And at the heart of everything was what he called his town center, which was going to rise like a Manhattan amongst the farm fields. And if you look at what eventually transpired, that's pretty much what developed. One of his village centers, the most successful, I would argue, is shown here. It's the Lake Ann Village Center, which opens in 1966. It's designated as a historic district by the county in 1981 and added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2017. But it is one of the best examples of brutalist architecture in Northern Virginia, as well as the application of new town planning concepts that we see. The town center, and this is here's Lake Ann with Heron House, which is the high-rise development that occurs. But just imagine driving out in rural Fairfax County. It's dark roads, and then all of a sudden you just see these signs for this new subdivision and the type of architecture that you've never seen before. It's pretty remarkable. Here you can see the Dulles Access Road looking west towards Dulles Airport. You can see the area, just a tremendous amount of area that Bob Simon envisioned for industrial and commercial development with his Reston Center for Industry and Government. Then you can see golf courses and communities around those golf courses on the north and south sides of the toll road. Kings Park and Kings Park West, this is about 1,100 homes off of Braddock Road, west of the Beltway, opens up in the 1960s and late 60s. That was considered the end of the line as you head west to Braddock Road at that point in time. It's kind of hard to believe now. Tyson's Corner, pretty remarkable area. It's a rural crossroads at the intersection of two historic highways. It evolves by the 1970s into the downtown of Fairfax County with shopping malls and businesses and everything like that. It gets a huge boost with a grade separated interchange of Route 123 and Route 7 in the mid-1960s or so. Here's what it looks like in 1970. So still a lot of land to develop. And Westgate and West Park, which opens up in 1962, shown here, is a 600-acre research development park with 36 buildings and about 3 million square feet of office space. Most communities would kill to have 3 million square feet of office space, and we seem to have them as a dime a dozen around here. Tyson's Corner Center opens up in 1968. The 50th anniversary was just a couple years ago, but this was the first major development here. It's undertaken by Ted Lerner, but it draws national attention to Northern Virginia. The first Apple store ever opens in 2001. It's one of the first super regional malls in the country, and today the mall has about 2.1 million square feet of space and has been reimagined recently. In 2013, it was sort of reimagined, and if you've gone up to the platform and seen what's happening, they're making much better use of the space, going vertical on the site. And in 2013, this shopping mall was assessed for $1 billion making it the only one at the time in Virginia to be assessed of over $1 billion, and by far and away the most valuable single property in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. During this time, even though a lot of development is occurring in Fairfax County in the 1960s, there's still things going on in Arlington. Arlington's population continued to rise throughout the decades of the 50s and 60s, but it flattened out and it started to experience a decline in the 1960s as the county approached build out. The first, if you know your history, you can see in the upper left-hand corner the Key Bridge as it comes into Roslin. Roslin was little more than a rundown area full of low-lying lumber yards and single-story retailers and car lots and pawnbrokers. Things changed in 1959 when Marriott built the Key Bridge Marriott that spurred redevelopment. You can see it in the center of the image that's in the lower right-hand corner. But there were civil rights unrest that occurred in the 1960s and white flight from the inner city of the district that was one of the major causes for Roslin's rapid development. And the county envisioned building a neighborhood of office buildings from 12 to 15 stories to fill the need for federal government office space. Most of Roslin's large office towers that remained are from that period of the 1960s and 1970s. And you can see the change in the skyline in a 5-year period. Total redevelopment between 1962 up top to 1967 at the bottom. And Roslin became sort of this concrete canyon of white streets, pedestrian overpasses, which were in vogue at the time, and highways as well. Today, it is being reimagined. There was the 2015 Roslin sector plan that was adopted, and there's been a lot of new investment with a huge emphasis on residential development in Roslin. And it dubs itself sort of the Manhattan skyline of the District of Columbia or the metropolitan area. Pretty remarkable when you're in it. It's very small, but it's very impressive at the same time. At the southern end of Arlington, there was a growing demand for office space that helped drive the development and transform Crystal City into an attractive urban center. You had developer Robert Smith that plans the first apartment building in the 1960s. You get the Patent and Trademark Office, the Institute of Defense Analysis, establishing their offices in Crystal City in the 1960s. And there's several apocryphal stories about how the name Crystal City came into being, but it started with the first building, Crystal House, and then, just glommed on from there, from Crystal Gateway, Crystal House 2, Crystal Towers, eventually the whole neighborhood. Pretty remarkable. When we look at other amenities that make a complete community in what otherwise was a rural area of Western Northern Virginia, these newcomers were very much pioneers. A lot of things that we now take for granted and expect in our communities was non-existent. Fairfax Hospital broke ground in 1958. It opened up 3 years later on time. There's a story that a lady showed up about 2 hours before the noon ribbon cutting for it. She was pregnant and she gave birth. And by the 1980s, there were more live births occurring at Fairfax Hospital than any other hospital in the country. And it routinely ranks in the top 5 nationally. And I was born here probably in room 583 shown right here. But a lot of people were born there, and it's amazing to see what they've done. You also need parks as well. The Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority is created. It's an interjurisdictional agency that today operates more than 10,000 acres of parks at 30 regional parks, but it's created in 1959 between the City of Falls Church, Fairfax, and Arlington, initially to preserve waterways and things like that. One of the best known parks is the Washington Old Dominion Trails. It's one of the first, it is the first example of a successful Rails to Trails program as well. Fairfax County Park Authority is established in 1950 by the Board of Supervisors with a goal to reserve 15 acres of open land for every 1,000 residents. Today, you know a lot of their parks, Lake Accotink, Burke Lake Park, Lake Fairfax, Huntley Meadows, Laurel Hill. But today, the Park Authority is the single largest landowner in the county. It oversees 24,000 acres of parks, about 9% of the county. That is 44% larger than all of Arlington County. And it serves about 17 million visitors annually. It is truly a success story. Wolf Trap opens up in 1966. It's the first national park for the performing arts, which is pretty remarkable. And Fairfax County Public Schools start seeing tremendous growth in the 1950s and 1960s. By the 1980s, it operates the largest bus fleet east of the Mississippi. And today is the second largest bus fleet behind New York City. Northern Virginia Community College opens up in the 1950s as well. Keep in mind, there were not many opportunities for post-secondary education in the District of Columbia after World War II. AU, Georgetown, they didn't have the room to expand. So there is the state adopts the Community College Act in the 1960s, and Nova becomes the first to take advantage of that. Opens up its Annandale campus in 1967. Later expands to 6 other campuses across the area. George Mason, this university that's putting on this program tonight, opens up in 1950 as an extension of UVA, which many hailed as a step towards Thomas Jefferson's 1817 plan for a series of regional colleges within a day's ride of the homes that it was intended to serve. In 1959, the town of Fairfax deeds 150 acres outside of its corporate boundaries that it happens to own to the University of Virginia to provide a permanent home for George Mason College, and it achieves independent status in 1972. Today, it has other campuses across the region, including, and it also opened up the Patriot Center in 1985, where a lot of us saw concerts. And today we take our kids there to see, Paw Patrol live or whatever in a pre-pandemic environment. There's a series of highways that opened up in 1950s and 1960s due to the Interstate Highway Act. You get the Capitol Beltway that spurs the most development in Northern Virginia, the 64-mile-long Interstate Freeway. Here's a couple of images when it opens, but there's numerous large shopping malls and sports and concerts and stadiums and other employment centers that open up, as soon as these bypasses around DC are opened. You get the extension of Interstate 95 south of Shirley Highway, which is shown here. And everybody's favorite parking lot, Interstate 66, is a critical east-west link, opens between Centerville and Gainesville in 1964, and then opens 3 lanes in each direction from the Beltway to Route 50 a couple of years later. And so there you can see when it gets built. A lot of controversy over the inside the Beltway portion, which I don't think we're going to get a chance to talk about today. Here is what I-95 looks like, and then once the HOV lanes were extended, this is what that same view looks like today over the Occoquan. There are reversible bus lanes. The HOV lanes that we all know well they start in 1951 as reversible bus lanes, become so successful that they open it up to high occupancy vehicle lanes the first time it's ever tried in this country. Started here in Northern Virginia. Series of other highways during the highway era that were planned, some of which were built, some of which were not built. Fairfax County has to respond to a lot of issues and growing pains, adopts its first zoning ordinance in 1940. And then, of course, the battles that were pitched and that continue to be pitched about housing and traffic and things like that, this is old hat. We've seen these type of protests before. They continue to this day as well. There's a battle between the rural landowners who want to develop their land and the new suburbanites that are located in the eastern portion of Northern Virginia, and this sort of tension for the needs and services that are brought on with new growth. I'm going to skip over the differences in how our transportation patterns and street patterns have changed over the years, but suffice to say we've moved from a grid street pattern all the way through the 1980s and sort of what we call the loop and lollipops pattern with lots of cul-de-sacs. And each time you go, decade after decade, you get fewer and fewer grids, fewer and fewer redundancies, fewer and fewer chances to have alternate methods, so that everything is sort of packed out onto the main state highway routes, which causes a lot of our traffic problems today. So we go into the 1970s. There's new developments all over the place. The Pentagon Road mixing bowl network that came with the Pentagon, along with Shirley Highway, is completely rebuilt between 1970 and 1973. It becomes the largest interchange complex in the world when it's completed. This was the original mixing bowl. We also have Metrorail coming to Northern Virginia. The Metro starts 1972. It was an interstate compact between DC, Maryland, and Virginia. It really was a planning experience and regional cooperation that has not been, was never attempted before, and frankly hasn't been attempted since. In Northern Virginia, we get the first Roslin Station that opens up in 1977 with its vaulted and cathedral-like ceilings, and then to Clarendon and Boston by 1979. Arlington had, again, reached sort of the pinnacle of its population growth, and it decided what it needed to do was to reinvest in its older commercial centers, or it was going to die and be eclipsed by Fairfax County and never recover. And so it worked tirelessly to make sure that it was able to run the Metrorail under Roslin, Virginia Square Courthouse, in Ballston, all the way out. And it was going to use Metrorail as a way to concentrate its development around those stations with these nodes, these high density nodes around each of the stations. Then it tapers down to the next node, then it tapers down again to the next node. And then it protects the established residential communities on the periphery. Here's the cut and cover method for Metrorail at Virginia Square. Here's where it shows it going through the courthouse station when it opened, and then west of Ballston, VDOT eventually got its way and put it at a surface level between the Interstate 66 in each direction. But if you go out there today to the what's known today as the Roslin-Ballston corridor, it is perhaps one of the most successful examples of transit-oriented development. Again, high-density development right around the Metrorail station, tapering down on the periphery. And here it is looking at Roslin, looking westbound. And again, another beautiful picture of Roslin. In Fairfax County, you get Skyline Center opening right on the Arlington border, high density in 1972, 8 apartment buildings, 6 office buildings, a hotel and shopping center. There was a collapse in March of 1973. The 26-story Skyline Plaza Tower 1, some deaths occurred in that during the construction. This is what really got Fairfax County to do its, its inspections branch, because this is the first time that we're seeing this type of high density development occurring here. And when you're standing on the steps of the Capitol looking west, you see those Spartan structures at Bailey's Crossroads rising in the distance, but really remarkable for a suburbanizing county to have that level of high density development. You get shopping malls. Springfield Mall opens in 1973 as an enclosed mall. It will later be closed in 2012 and reinvented as Springfield Town Center. Prince William County grows along the I-95 corridor. You get Dale City starting in the 1960s, which still is not built out. Today, there's more than 70,000 people living in Dale City. You get Montclair in 1979. You get Lake Ridge between 1969 and the late 1970s. Today, it has 7,700 housing units in about 70 different subdivisions. And the scale of the development in Prince William County is much larger than anything in Fairfax. By the time it reaches Prince William County, you've got thousands of acres being compiled together for these large, massive subdivisions. There are major revitalization efforts occurring in downtown Alexandria during this time as well, in the late 1970s, early 1980s. You have the renovation of the torpedo factory, which is shown on the right-hand side of the screen here. And you also have in the redevelopment of the city's waterfront occurring in the 1980s. And then the other end of Old Town, you get Braddock Road and King Street Metro Rail stations opening up in 1983. Here's the torpedo factory in the early 1980s. And again, you can see sort of this twin anchor phenomenon that we're going to use the waterfront of the torpedo factory at one end and the new Metrorail stations at the other end. And that's going to fuse together the revitalization of Old Town Alexandria. Alexandria annexed a pretty big chunk of Fairfax County in 1952, was hotly contested, went to the Supreme Court, but they eventually got it. I went to elementary school in Old Town Alexandria. I was bused all the way downtown as part of the racial integration busing that started occurring in 1969 and was continued through 1993. And there I am, the dork in the patrol badge here. But it was meant to fuse together the west end of Alexandria with the east end of Alexandria and pair schools downtown. But you can see the tremendous amount of open space that occurred or that Alexandria got when it annexed that area in 1952. And then they also needed a naming regime for all the north-south streets and for the area west of Quaker Lane. And so you can see in pink, all those north-south streets were named after Confederate generals, be it Beauregard, Pickett, Van Dorn, Jordan Street, Howard Street, all named after Confederate generals. The west end of Alexandria booms between the 1960s and 1970s. You got the proximity to Shirley Highway that makes it desirable. You get the Hamlets apartment complex. Southern Towers opens up in 1964 with 2,400 units and 5 buildings. You get Landmark Mall. Here's Southern Towers here. Landmark Mall is an open air mall when it first opens up in 1965. It would later be enclosed in 1990. Where they would then, and you can see in the upper right-hand corner, they filmed Wonder Woman 84. It's a vacant mall now, but is planned for major redevelopment into another sort of open-air mixed-use community. You get the Fox Chase apartments that are built in the West End. Mark Center, shown in the right-hand corner here, opens up in the 1980s. It's a 3 million square foot complex at Seminary and Beauregard and Shirley Highway. And then you go into the 1980s. New companies move into the area. You get Fortune 500 companies moving to Fairfax County in the 1980s. The first is Mobile. moves its headquarters out of New York City here. Later, it would be purchased by Nova Fairfax to expand their offerings. Freddie Mac consolidates its headquarters in Tyson's Corner in 1990. If there is one building that describes the growth that occurs in the 1980s in Northern Virginia to talk about the economic prowess of our region, but especially Fairfax County, it has to be the shopping bag building shown here called Tycon Tower. Opens up in 1986. It's a landmark building that embodies the spirit of our entire region's 1980s development boom, the go-go 80s. It's a 17-story brick postmodern building. It intended to have two sister buildings, three towers sort of in a curve. But at the top of the building in 1989, there's something called the Tower Club that opens up on the top floor. It's a private dining club that for many years serves as the head or the place for bigwigs and head honchos that they dine for lunch and everything like that. But this is what Tyson's Corner and downtown Fairfax County kind of looks like in the 1980s. There is the National Automobile Dealers Association building that opens in the 1980s. And I can remember distinctly driving through with my mom's hatchback Mazda back then and seeing this view, this building rising out of the amber waves of grain of overgrown farm fields and this building just sprouting out. There's the Rotunda shown in the lower right-hand corner. It's a condominium with about 1,100 units. Tyson's Galleria opens up in 1988. It's an upscale mall to complement the existing Tyson's Corner Mall, which you can see in the background. They secured the first Macy's in the region, first Neiman Marcus, first Saks Fifth Avenue, Ritz office building, Ritz Carlton adjacent to it, and then two anchor buildings, office buildings as well. It goes through some ups and downs, but today it's got Chanel, David Yurman, Tory Burch, Versace. They have, in some cases, their only DC area stores in this mall. Fairfax Square, shown under construction here, opens up in 1990. It's right across from Tyson's One, clad in Brazilian granite and cobblestone courtyard. It's anchored by a Tiffany's, which at that time was the company's largest store outside of Manhattan. It includes an Elizabeth Arden, an Equinox Gym, a Hermes, but it further cements Northern Virginia's position as the Rodeo Drive of the region. The question of the 1980s, the planning question for Fairfax County, was really managing the timing and development of the center of the county called Fairfax Center. You get Fair Oaks Mall that's shown here, which opens up in 1980 in the midst of a recession. But you get a planning concept of how to replan or plan this area of the county. And what came out of it, if you drive around Fairfax Center, and especially the Fair Lakes area, the images that are shown here are really what ended up happening. Fair Lakes, at the heart of all this, is 620 acres. It is built by Hazel Peterson. It is a large mixed-use park and is one of the leafiest, most park-like developments, subject to tremendous design guidelines. The first time we were really kind of playing around with design guidelines about relegating parking, no gas stations, having a lot of green space and things like that. And if you drove out there in the early 1990s, you never have seen anything like that before. It was the first time we'd seen that in Northern Virginia. If there was one building that talked about or that was emblematic of our economic development progress in the 80s on the private sector, the one that was kind of like Brasilia rising out of the Amazon from a public sector perspective has to be the Fairfax County Government Center, which opens up in 1992. It is emblematic of the rise of Northern Virginia. And the Massey building that we saw, Fairfax County had outgrown that by the early 1980s. And it became apparent that they needed to have sort of a centralized place outside of the city of Fairfax. And they opened in the midst of a recession. And when they did, it became known as the Taj Mahal. If you go there today, it is an impressive building. There is Brazilian granite, which is very popular then. You got a lot of woodwork on the inside of the major public areas, but it is impressive. At the same time that Fairfax was going suburban, it's interesting that Prince William County moved some of its offices out to Woodbridge, out of Manassas to Woodbridge to the McCourt building. And then Loudoun County, which also opened up its downtown government center in 1993, they decided to stay urban in the heart of their historic county center in Leesburg. And so that's what's shown in the upper left-hand corner. This is some of the growth that occurs in Fairfax Center using the old ADC street atlases. Here it is in 1982. Here it is in about 1987. Here it is in 1995, 1998, And so you can see the tremendous amount of growth that occurs during this period by sort of pacing these. There's other planned developments that occur around Northern Virginia at the time. Burke Center, shown in the upper left-hand corner, is a 1,400-acre planned residential community. This was Phil Hazel's first big project as a developer, and he got into partnership with one of his clients, Milt Peterson. But this was built on part of the land that the government was originally going to condemn for what became Dulles International Airport. Today, there's about 5,800 residents. You get Newington Forest opening up off of Hoos Road. You get the Franconia-Beulah Street corridor in the late 1980s with Manchester Lakes, Kingstown, Lansdowne, Amberley, sort of the list goes on and on. There is a town center in Kingstown, which continues to be reimagined from sort of a suburban configuration, and they're going vertical with some new residents and things like that. Here's the Beulah Street corridor in 1980. Here it is in 1997, just tremendous growth, including the extension of the Franconia-Springfield Parkway. You get Fairview Park, which opens up in the late 1980s on about 334 acres, planned as a high-quality mixed-use development that meets the county objectives for economic development and compatible infill. It was hotly contested by neighbors, but it came with a major interchange at what became known as Fairview Park Drive. You get Reston Town Center opening up, groundbreak in 1988 to realize Bob Simon's original master plan for a town center to provide a highly urban landscape in the heart of a rural setting. A lot of us remember when it was just this, and then over time it has developed. Here it is in 1990 when it opened, and here it is today. And it's been a very successful development if you've gone out there. The Oak Hill area in western Fairfax County grows between the 1970s and especially in the 80s. The area between the Dulles Access Road to the north, Centerville Road to the west, and West Ox Road and Fox Mill Roads to the east. Franklin Farm is one of the best examples, but here it is in 1982, here it is in 1997. And here's Franklin Farm, built in 1987 on an 1,100-acre dairy farm, the last major dairy farm in Fairfax County, which was a county that was known quite well for dairy. I think this image and Chantilly, this is Centerville. This is truly remarkable. Centerville just booms in a 10-year period between, say 1980 and 1996. You got Sully Station, Center Ridge, Little Rocky Run, but here it is in 1980. Here it is 11 years later. Farms are gone, farmers have moved on, they've sold out, the developers have built everything, but pretty remarkable. Here's Chantilly. Sully Historic Site is right here. This is the bottom part of Dullest Airport. You can see Route 50 running in the east-west area, and you can see Route 28 going north-south. Here it is 1980. Here it is 10 years later. Just tremendous growth, just pervading the landscape. The Route 28 corridor is identified for industrial development. There is retail, office, warehouse, manufacturing, and by the 1980s, half of Fairfax County's industrial and flex office space is in this corridor. There's the Route 28 tax district, which was badly needed to widen the road. And over time, interchanges have popped up so that traffic, by and large, flows tremendously well. And a lot of us remember what it was like when it was just 2 lanes and how much it backed up. When you go out there, it's amazing how they've gotten rid of all the traffic lights. So just some more images of Route 28. At the corner of the Dulles Access Road and Route 28 is Dulles Corner. One of the things, again, sort of another Fair Lakes, Fairview Park type of community, but on a smaller scale with a lot of art. Westfield opens up in the late 1988 or late 1980s on an 1,100-acre campus. It becomes an office park off of Route 28. I recall in reading that there was a big Civil War reenactment just prior to development in 1986. But you went out to Westfield's, and again, you hadn't seen anything like this. In the lower right-hand corner is the Westfield's International Conference Center, which opens up in 1989. That was just a tremendous thing. You drive through Stonecroft Boulevard, and you can see the median where my cursor is. Having a landscape median like that in something that was not the GW Parkway, you didn't see before. Later, you get the National Reconnaissance Office opening up. You get the tremendous amount of landscaping that the developers take great pride in doing with their dry stack stone walls, which is really a tribute back to Northern Virginia's heritage. There is a lot of growth that occurs during this time, and then there are battles over growth. In Fairfax County, it's a long story, but there's what's known as the Occoquan down zoning in 1982. That down zones about 41,000 acres to basically 5-acre lots and preserves the areas around Clifton and western Centerville. Was a protracted very famous circuit court decision here. But if you go out to Clifton today, you can see that a lot of it, even though it looks bucolic and you've got nice white picket fences, it's largely just large subdivisions on 5-acre lots. And this is what it looks like here. But if you go out there, it is quite beautiful. This is an image off of Pope's Head Road looking south towards Clifton Road. And this is what a lot of the Clifton area looks like. And it did do its job of preserving a large open space, but they are, don't be fooled, they are large scale subdivisions when you go out there. And this is kind of what Western Centerville looks like and how it's developed, but this is also in Fairfax County. And this is a direct result of the downzoning. In the 1980s as well, down the Route 95 corridor, can't ignore Potomac Mills, opens up in 1985. By 1993, it was Virginia's #1 tourist destination. And by 1986, with the opening of its phase 2, it stretches for 9/10 of a mile from end to end. A tremendous amount of controversy over what's known as the Williams Center tract. I don't have a lot of time to cover this, but the bottom line is Hazel Peterson developers won a rezoning for a corporate office park here at about 975 homes in the 1980s, as well as a 1.2 million square foot regional mall a little bit later. Opponents opposed it and eventually got the Congress to condemn the land and force it into Manassas Battlefield Park. And there was a lot of anger about a woman named Annie Snyder, shown here, who died a few years ago. Tremendous growth as far as the Save the Battlefield Coalition and the Piedmont Environmental Council coming together on it. I would commend you to the Piedmont Environmental Council's website. They have a nice video on it, about a 10-minute video on it. That's pretty remarkable. Loudon also booms during this time in the 1980s. The projects in Loudon were much bigger than Fairfax. Most of the growth was in the eastern part of the county, and there was an acknowledgement that growth was going to come as soon as Fairfax built out. The question was, how do we manage it? And even though most of the physical construction took place in the 1980s and 1990s, plans for these communities in Loudon were much earlier in the 1970s and 80s. And I would also say, too, that by the time that growth was at Loudon's doors, the proffer system, which is the quote-unquote voluntary commitments that developers offer to justify the propriety of rezonings, was in full swing. And Loudon, more than any other jurisdiction, was able to exact cash concessions and transportation concessions from developers for school sites and roads and that sort of thing. And the county planned an entire new road network, sort of imprinted on the land, that transformed Eastern Loudon as development came. This is Ashburn Village. This is what a lot of Eastern Loudon looks like, and this is what a lot of that road network looks like, most of which was built by the development community. This is what, again, sort of just all over Eastern Loudon kind of looks like. Xerox in 1989 says that they want to build an $8 billion campus on a 2,200-acre tract, which later becomes known as Lansdowne. Eventually sports an executive conference and training center, a golf course, and resort hotel, and about 1,800 homes. Here's what Ashburn looks like in 1985. It's pretty hard to imagine, but the W&OD Railroad bed is going through it in east-west direction, but that's downtown Ashburn. In Falls Church, a little bit closer in, while everyone headed west during the 1980s, the inner suburbs still were looking to redevelop. Falls Church starts its streetscape project in 1989 with the signature iconic W&OD Trail Bridge, which goes across Route 7, West Broad Street. You get George Mason Square opening up in 1984 and 1985. And then the streetscape, which when you drive into downtown Falls Church, you see the brick sidewalks, you see the acorn street lamps. And then in 1997, State Theater renovates itself and opens up as a music venue. Clarendon continues to develop, pretty remarkable. Huge investment in 1989 with the Fashion Center at Pentagon City. Melvin Simon Associates builds it, 170 retailers, just like Tyson's 2, anchored by a Macy's, anchored by a Nordstrom and a Ritz-Carlton. And this is able to, this mall is able to take advantage of being closer to DC than Tyson's. But it spurs additional mixed-use development in the neighborhood, including Pentagon Center across Hayes Street and the upscale Pentagon Row and residential complex that is adjacent to the mall. Metrorail continues marching westward and southward. You get the Huntington Metrorail Station in 1983. You get the Orange Line Station shown here. This is the Vienna Metrorail Station, if you can believe it, opening up in 1986. And at the time that Metrorail came into Fairfax County in the blue lines and the orange lines, the emphasis was not on development like in Arlington. The emphasis was on serving commuters. And so you have these large commuter parking lots right around all of Fairfax County stations rather than developing it. And at the Vienna station, Hazel Peterson had proposed something called Virginia Center. There's a lot of controversy around it and some votes that are very curious, but that was a huge missed opportunity, and Fairfax County would spend a lot of time over the next coming decades sort of revisiting what it meant to have mass transit in its jurisdiction. I mentioned the controversy over I-66 inside the Beltway. This is something that VDOT was salivating over for many years. It was stopped. Eventually, it would open up in 1982, following a very lengthy controversy over its socioeconomic and environmental impacts. Few things had galvanized people in DC and in Virginia to come together to stop a road. Then did the I-66 controversy, and it was supposed to go at Roslin over the Three Sisters. When you walk across Key Bridge, you look over to the north, you can see three little stones popping out of the Potomac. There was supposed to be a bridge there that would carry you into Georgetown with a series of underground interstates. I-66 was the first to fall in this. And what came out of it was a decision in 1978 where the Carter administration was going to greenlight it. It would be 2 lanes in each direction. There would be Metrorail in the median. There would be a trail, there'd be an urban deck at Roslin and that sort of thing. The Pope Leahy House, if you've ever seen it, it's down at Woodlawn Plantation in Fairfax County. This is a house that was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright on 2.5 acres. It was removed bit by bit by the National Trust for Historic Preservation and reconstructed there. But this sat in the middle of Arlington County at the East Falls Church Metro Station, was eventually created. Roads were built during the 1980s. Including the Fairfax County Parkway, which would be eventually completed in 2001. The Dulles Access Road would become the Dulles Toll Road in 1984 when twin spans were built on both sides of the access road to serve the communities along the access road, because people were going to the airport, looping around and coming back home, and it was becoming a problem. And so General Assembly allowed the construction of this road. And then in the outer jurisdictions, if you traveled on Route 7, we talked about the Leesburg bypass shown in the blue here that was constructed in the 1960s. And then throughout the 80s, around Hamilton, Purcellville, and Round Hill, the Loudoun County, Loudoun Valley bypasses were opened up during this period of time. And then one of the big things, if you can remember this, in 1980, the third lane between Woodbridge or between Triangle and Ashland was opened up along I-95. It's hard to believe that I-95 was still 4 lanes all the way up to 1980. A series of other things occur, sort of cementing Northern Virginia as a corporate headquarters, but also the prowess of our education system. You get Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, which is christened in the 1980s. And then you also have the Center for Innovative Technology, which opens up in 1988, just west of Dulles, or east of Dulles Airport. When you look at the growth between 1950 and the 2010s, Fairfax County is clearly the 8-ton gorilla. And it's no wonder, because they've been able to absorb all the population growth, a majority of it. It's no wonder that the other jurisdictions look envious or fearful or angry at Fairfax County because of the political weight it's able to carry. But that is because 1/7 of the population of the Commonwealth of Virginia resides within its boundaries. And again, you can see the population for the other groups as well. As we go into the 1990s, there's a series of regional job growth. The go-go 80s goes into the slow growth 1990s with the economic recession. Just a couple of things here. Ford's Landing, the rebuilding of, or the last stretch of the Alexandria waterfront occurs. Prince William County sees a lot of growth as well. There are a series of cross-county links because Route 234 and Davis Ford Road, if a school bus stops or there's an accident, getting between Woodbridge and Dumfries it just stops. So there's a series of east-west roads that are built. Prince William builds its own Prince William Parkway, between Manassas and Woodbridge in the 1990s using bond financing. There is the Route 234 widening, which occurs in the 1990s. And then there is a bypass around Manassas, which is also built during that period of time. These are just some of the images. And if ever you guys have seen Deep Impact or traveled down the 234 corridor, right before the 234 bypass around Manassas opened up, Hollywood came and filmed the mass destruction of Manassas. So check it out, starring Morgan Freeman. Outside of Manassas, the area that's between there and Haymarket, you get the areas around Gainesville, which the battlefield for a long time served to stem the tide of growth in Western Prince William, but there's a series of industrial parks, Wellingford, Laurel Park, Virginia Gateway, that opens up during this time. A lot of us remember Nissan Pavilion when it was Nissan Pavilion. It opens up in 1995 in a place called Bristow. I don't care who you are. Most of us had never even heard of Bristow or Wellington Road or Balsford Road or any of those places before it opened up. And then Disney announces plans in the 1990s to build something called Disney's America. The Save the Battlefield Coalition comes out of hiding, works with the PEC, and then a series of things happen that stop Disney dead in its tracks. But most of the land that was slated for the proposed theme park was later developed into the Piedmont community and Dominion Valley community as well. Loudoun continues to grow. You get the Dulles Greenway opening up in 1995, spearheaded by this woman, Maggie Bryant. And that was the first toll road that had been constructed, privately financed toll road since colonial times here. And then the area north of Dulles Airport in Sterling just becomes host to literally dozens upon dozens of warehouses as well. And then as Loudoun develops during the 1990s, you get these large plan unit developments. Again, much larger communities than anything that had preceded them in Fairfax, with the exception of perhaps Reston. But they included parks, tree conservation areas, trails, wetlands. You get South Riding in 1995, the first major residential development in Southeast Loudoun on about 2,000 acres. You get Broadlands in 1995 on 1,500 acres. Cascades, 1990. Lansdowne that we talked about with Xerox opening up here. And they build out with 2,100 homes in the late 1990s as well. You get Ted Lerner opening up Dulles Town Center in 1999, a 1.4 million square foot shopping mall. University Center, these sort of corporate office campuses, office space in a tech type developments. Everyone's going out here, whether it's AOL, MCI WorldCom, Verizon, et cetera. The Lorton Prison closes in 2001. Fairfax County works to try to rename the area Laurel Hill. But as soon as that prison closed, you better believe that the neighborhoods or the areas around the prison that were not in public ownership sprout up almost immediately, be it Cross Point, Barrington, South Run Oaks, Lorton Station, shown here almost immediately. Roads during this time include Franconia Springfield Parkway, the Virginia Railway Express, the Joe Alexander Transportation Center. You get the widening of I-95 and the incorporation of the HOV lanes occurring as well, all the way down to Woodbridge. And my wife is from Columbia, South Carolina. When her father moved her up here to work for the White House several years ago, it was the first time she was leaving Columbia to come to the big city, and she hit the HOV lanes at this, in sort of this view, right at twilight when the lights popped on. And she realized for the first time that she had made it to the big city. It was big. And most of us take this for granted, but it is impressive when you drive in, especially if you're not sitting in traffic. I-66 gets widened during this time. National Airport gets a new terminal in 1997 with 35 aircraft gates and a sort of a national hall designed by Cesar Pelli with nice views of the Capitol. Very, very cool. So when we look back upon a lot of the growth battles that occur in the late 1990s, Fairfax County, we talked about the Occoquan corridor around Clifton, sort of the downzoning that occurs there. Prince William County downzones what it calls the rural crescent, shown in Manila here, to 10-acre lots, basically, to stem the tide of growth in Western Prince William. It's in Loudoun that there's even a Virginia Supreme Court case over regarding the notice and advertisement for it, but a huge downzoning that occurs around Middleburg and Percival and Lovettsville, Western Loudoun County, with 10 and 20 acre lots and comprehensively planned for up to 50 acres per unit. So really tremendous downzoning. And when you put all of that together, if you take all of the jurisdictions between Fairfax, Winchester, Charlottesville, all the way down to Richmond, and you take a look at the areas that they have cordoned off for their growth or their service areas, everything that's shown in red here, I've put them all together, but everything that's shown in red here are places where it's more than 1 unit per 3 acres. Everywhere that's shown in white are areas that are comprehensively planned or zoned for at least 1 unit per 3 acres or greater. And so when we talk about the housing affordability issue in our region, you have to put all these comprehensive plans together and see how restricted the sort of the ghost of smart growth has been. And now that we have reached the development in Eastern Loudoun, sort of that Maginot Line in Western Prince William and Eastern Loudoun, and Fairfax is built out, If we think it's expensive now, we don't have large plan unit developments to absorb that growth that we've had for generations. It's going to be extremely expensive if we don't get a handle on growth and if we don't get a handle on housing affordability and where we're going to put people. But I just wanted to show this because when you compare them all together, we really are limited to where we can grow as a region. And that's going to have a tremendous economic and social impact on us. As we go into the 2000s, just sort of wrap up, you have the build out of the outer or the inner suburbs, the build out of sort of the outer suburbs. Northern Virginia is an economic success story. You get the base realignment closure commission. You get the engineering proving grounds around Fort Belvoir being completed out, and the completion of the Fairfax County Parkway. The Woodrow Wilson Bridge opens up in 2006. The original span opened up in 1961. It badly needed to be redeveloped between Maryland and DC. It comes with a huge interchange for Route 1 as well, occurring during this time. If you were around in the 1980s and 1990s, you knew that every traffic report started with the traffic mess at Springfield. This is what the Springfield Interchange looked like in 1988. And over a 8-year period, a 7-phase construction, this interchange was redeveloped into a huge stack interchange with 50 ramps, 20 lanes, the merging of 3 interstates. It is a machine for sorting traffic. You get the phase 1 Silver Line opening up through Reston and Tyson's in 2014. We're still waiting for the phase 2 Silver Line, and we may be waiting there for a long time. Reston has reinvented itself. The Reston Center for Industry and Government between Sunrise Valley and Sunset Hills Road for large scale development around these Metrorail stations. And this is what it looks like. There are many cities all over. And this is what downtown Reston pretty much looks like today. And you can see sort of the toll road winding its way through with Tyson's in the background. At Tyson's Corner, the county finally got the message. It has 4 stations in Tyson's Corner, no parking at any of its stations, 0 parking. And just oppose that to where the county was with the Huntington Station, Dunlorne, and Vienna Station back in the 1980s. In Tyson's Corner, this is a picture from a farm in Great Falls. It's rising like a mini city. And when you drive in from Maryland into Northern Virginia and those hot lanes start, it's like you're entering Atlanta. It's like you're entering a major city, because you are. It is the 9th largest conglomerate of commercial office space in the country, and we have it here in Northern Virginia. The Capital One Center shown here is the second property to be assessed at over $1 billion in Virginia. And that is under construction. I strongly advise all of you to go to the Star Hill Tavern or Star Hill Brewery that's on the top of Capital One Hall. Fairfax County spent several years trying to reimagine what the street pattern looks like. And you can see on the left-hand side what the street pattern looks like today, and on the right-hand side what they hope to achieve with its grid over time. The vaunted National Automobile Dealers Association building has come down, what I, again, remember seeing with my mom's hatchback. And this is that view as you drive in. I-66 is being reimagined with hot lanes. The interchange at Haymarket shown here, it's a reverse diamond interchange, which is kind of weird, kind of cool. Gainesville shown in the upper left-hand corner, the railroad crossing is gone, and that's a huge interchange at 66 and Route 29. We spent about 5 or 6 years reconfiguring the Beltway with the hot lanes, and for a while we thought that the hot lanes were actually going to work, and then of course they didn't. I-95 was also reconfigured, and I wish that they would have done permanent reversible lanes or permanent lanes in each direction rather than having to sit on a Sunday for about 4 hours waiting for them to turn things around. We talked about the completion of the Fairfax County Parkway through Fort Belvoir's engineering proving grounds. Route 7 has all interchanges now, all the way to Leesburg. It's remarkable how well traffic flows there. And here's that grid of the streets that developers have paid for through the development of Eastern Loudoun. You get the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, which is pretty remarkable, opening up in Loudoun as well. Data Center Alley in Loudoun County. This has been a lot of the reason Loudoun's gotten a lot of economic success is because 70% of the world's internet traffic moves through that county every single day. You get the development of Brambleton and other large projects. Willowsford is kind of the last one before you hit Loudoun's rural area. 2,000 homes on 4,000 acres. Stone Ridge, the last large plan unit development as you head west towards Middleburg. One Loudoun, these areas around Loudoun that are developing. You can see here, and again, I am coming to the conclusion of this, Eric, I promise, but the area around west of Manassas, between Manassas at the bottom and Gainesville at the top, just tremendous growth in the late 1990s, early 2000s. Really remarkable. And here's a sign showing development proudly funded by Equinox Investment, Richmond American Homes, for the widening of different roads. So with that, let me show you this. This is the Disney site. And instead of Disney coming, what we got were developments over time. Dominion Valley, Piedmont, that sort of thing. Lake Manassas, there's a Wegmans there. Just amazing growth with what we've seen. And I'm going to zoom down to my very last slide. And I take tremendous pride in this last slide, because when you are coming in from, here's Mosaic District, the revitalization of the inner suburbs. When you are coming in from Maryland every day into Northern Virginia, the sign on I-95 before you hit the Cabin John Bridge, the control city is not Richmond, it's not Fredericksburg. The control city is Northern Virginia. And that just shows you how important we are as a region. One last thing I'll say, I keep saying that. This shows the population of Virginia by county and by jurisdiction in terms of voting capability. So you can see how important Northern Virginia is to the statewide elections, which are going to occur next Tuesday. And you can see the areas down south in red in Russell County. They might all be red, but Russell County doesn't account for much in terms of overall population from a statewide perspective. So just see from a political perspective how important we are as well as a region. So with that, here's the last slide. We got Amazon. I didn't get a chance to talk about that, but this shows you how far we've come as a region. So Eric, back to you.
Thanks very much, Andrew. That was a great effort in condensing a 3-hour lecture in about an hour and 15 minutes. So we truly appreciate it. I just want to field maybe 2 questions from the audience tonight, if you bear, running about 5 minutes over what we said would be our end time. So one question we have is, as all of these subdivisions have developed, have HOAs been, increased in power and has shaped the residential options in Northern Virginia?
The answer is undoubtedly yes. I mean, for most of the area inside sort of the 123 area in Fairfax County, HOAs weren't really used, but as you made your way west, Franklin Farm, Centerville, Loudoun County, Prince William, every project that we pretty much do now has some sort of 4th level of government homeowners association. And, they control everything depending on how the developer sets it up originally. But, everything from open space to uses in your property to the color that you can paint your door. And I think as time goes by and the outer suburbs deteriorate, they look shiny and new now, but as they deteriorate over time, and it's going to be tens of thousands of homes that were all built in the same 10-year time frame, all kind of aging at the same time. There's going to be an interesting dynamic between homeowners that want to modernize their homes and getting enough votes that they need from an architectural review board perspective to change covenants, to change those types of things, and having to go through that design review board at the private level, not having a public process. But they've been very successful in helping deliver services to residents over time, and they are used here, they're used nationally.
And I don't know if this was included in your past research. Can you talk a little bit about the historically Black communities and what happened to them as this development occurred over the last 100 years?
There were historically Black communities scattered throughout Northern Virginia, descendants of slaves. One of the most famous, of course, being Gum Spring, north of Mount Vernon, with land that was left to the slaves of George Washington. Still a very intact African-American community on there in High Blow Valley. There was the area around what's known as Jackson City in Arlington County that had a large African-American population, and there's still some in the Knock area there. Some have been displaced by gentrification over time with rising property values. Perhaps the community that doesn't get almost any praise or notice is the Willard community, which was an area that was condemned by the federal government when Burke didn't work out for the airport. It was condemned by the federal government, and a lot of displacement occurred when the Dulles International Airport land was condemned by the federal government. And so that community went elsewhere as well. But the communities do exist throughout Northern Virginia, and it has a very rich history.
Okay, and then I guess from our point of view, we certainly share Andrew's comments about the growth of our region has been about development and smart development as time went on. And we certainly face challenges trying to figure out where the next wave of growth is going to come from. And hopefully that's something that we can tackle in future webinars with Andrew and other experts in the field. I have to cut us off right now, and just a couple of short announcements. We're now accepting applications for our real estate graduate program. And also I'd like to invite you all to our next webinar on November 17th called The Growth of Crowdfunding Real Estate Investments. So the websites are there. Just watch out for an email from us, or you can email me if you want to join that webinar on November 17th. So with that, I'd like to thank Andrew for his time and expertise this evening. It's always great that he comes and shares our mission of education around real estate. So we really, truly appreciate it. And with that, we come to a close, and we wish everybody a good evening and hope to see you at our next webinar. Thank you.